All right, so hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive today.
Uh-huh.
We're going to get into the Phlorena stim device.
Okay.
We've got this guide
Yeah.
as our source material.
Nice.
And yeah, of course, as always, we can't give any medical advice here,
Right.
but we're going to try to help you understand how to use it safely and effectively.
Yeah, for sure. And have a little fun along the way.
Yeah, and have a little fun, hopefully, learn something.
Definitely.
So
It's a great little device.
yeah, I mean, have you ever wondered, like if long hair can actually cause like shocks from this thing?
Yeah.
Or like how to, fine-tune those intensity settings.
Right.
We're going to cover all that and more.
Absolutely. We'll cover all the essentials and really try to, break down any questions people might have about the Phlorena stim device.
Yeah. So first things first, the guide
Yeah.
talks about, people being nervous about like getting zapped when they turn the device on,
Uh-huh.
which I can see why that would be a concern.
Yeah, for sure. That's a common concern. But, a really important point that the guide makes is that you always want to insert the probe before turning the device on, so that eliminates any kind of surprises.
Okay, good tip.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier something about like apps that actually like guide the placement of the probe,
Yes.
which sounds very high tech.
It is very high tech.
How does that even work?
Well, it's basically sensors in the probe
Okay.
that can actually track its position and give feedback.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty cool.
So it's like a virtual coach.
Exactly.
Right.
Guiding you to the perfect placement.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Speaking of placement, the guide describes like inserting the probe until only the base is visible.
Okay.
They even compare it to like inserting a tampon, but obviously you adjust for
Yeah.
comfort.
Right.
It's all about finding like that sweet spot where you're getting effective stimulation.
Right.
What happens if like the stimulation feels uneven?
That usually indicates that the probe isn't in full contact with your pelvic floor muscles. So it could be a placement issue,
Gotcha.
And the good news is you can usually adjust the probe until you feel even stimulation.
Okay, good. So good contact is key.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about another concern that came up in the guide, hair, specifically like whether or not you need to trim it before using the device.
Yeah. So the guide suggests that it's optional,
Okay.
but it can definitely enhance the experience.
Okay.
So think about it this way. The electrical current needs a clear path to effectively stimulate those muscles.
Okay.
And hair can actually act as a barrier
Okay.
and lead to those uneven sensations.
So trimming could make a difference.
Exactly. Especially if you have like thicker or longer hair.
Gotcha.
You might want to consider that.
That's a good tip.
Yeah.
What about intensity settings? So the guide emphasizes this idea of starting low and going slow,
Right.
which I get, in terms of comfort, but is there more to it than that?
Well, starting low allows you to gradually get used to the sensation. And it helps you find that setting that's perfect for you.
Right.
Because everybody's different.
Yeah, of course.
And, your ideal intensity might depend on your goals, whether you're trying to address like stress incontinence, urge incontinence, or just looking to tone your pelvic floor muscles.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so, some experimentation is key.
Yeah.
You want to find what works best for you.
Okay, so we've covered like insertion, placement, intensity. What about some of the more like practical questions that came up in the guide? Like, can you use it during your period?
Yeah, so the guide says it's generally safe,
Okay.
but personal comfort really matters.
Right.
So some women might want to pause during their period,
So of course,
which is totally fine. You got to listen to your body.
makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about keeping it clean? I mean, we're talking about a device that goes,
Right.
hygiene is pretty crucial.
Absolutely. Hygiene is very important.
Yeah.
And the guide recommends cleaning the probe after each use with just mild soap and water.
Okay.
You don't need anything harsh. It's just gentle cleanser. And of course, don't submerge the whole device in water.
Right. Got it.
Yeah.
So simple but effective.
Exactly.
Speaking of keeping it working, they also recommend replacing the probe every 1 to 2 years, depending on usage.
Yeah.
Replacing a probe that seems a little frequent.
Well, it's a good practice to make sure it's working optimally.
Okay.
Because over time, like anything you use regularly, it can wear down.
Right.
And so those electrical pulses might not be as effective.
Okay.
So it's recommended to replace it every couple of years.
So it's about maintaining that like electrical conductivity for the best results.
Exactly.
Okay, good to know. What about when things go wrong? Any troubleshooting tips from the guide?
Yeah, so the first thing to remember is that this device shouldn't hurt.
Oh.
If you're feeling any pain, stop and see what's going on.
Right.
It could be the intensity, the placement, something else.
Right.
And if it continues, definitely talk to your doctor
Yeah.
just to rule out anything else.
Always safety first.
Exactly.
What if the device just isn't working?
Well, the guide says, start by checking the simple things first.
Oh.
Batteries, connections, sometimes it's an easy fix.
Right.
And don't forget, the device manual and customer support are great resources
Right.
if you run into any problems.
So we've got the troubleshooting basics down,
Uh-huh.
but let's talk results.
Mm-hmm.
How long does it typically take to see improvement?
The guide suggests that most women notice improvements within 6 to 12 weeks,
Okay.
with consistent use, of course.
Right. So patience is key.
It is.
But here's something I found really interesting in the guide, this link between periods and increased incontinence. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so this highlights the role of hormones, particularly estrogen,
Right.
which plays a big role in maintaining that pelvic floor muscle strength.
Right.
And when those estrogen levels dip, like during your period,
Uh-huh.
those muscles can actually weaken,
Wow.
which makes you more susceptible to leaks.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So it's not just about like building strength. It's also about like recognizing these natural fluctuations our bodies go through.
Exactly.
So what can we do to kind of manage those effects?
Well, the guide highlights two main things: hydration
Okay.
and pelvic floor exercises.
Right.
Staying hydrated helps manage bloating,
Okay.
which can make incontinence worse.
Right.
And, those pelvic floor exercises can counter those hormonal dips in muscle strength.
It all makes sense. But you know what? This has kind of reminded me of that conversation we had about like the broader impact of hormone fluctuations on women's health.
Yes,
But I think that deserves its own deep dive.
I agree.
So for now, let's shift gears back to the Phlorena.
That sounds good.
And
Let's continue our exploration.
welcome back, everybody. So are we ready to like explore how these hormone shifts affect women's health, like beyond just the pelvic floor?
Yeah, definitely. I'm ready.
Okay, so we were talking about how, estrogen can dip during your period, and that can temporarily weaken your pelvic floor muscles.
But estrogen plays a role in way more than just that, right?
Right. Yeah, it's like bone density, cardiovascular health, like all sorts of things.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Wow.
And research actually shows this. For example, there's studies linking declining estrogen during menopause with an increased risk of osteoporosis.
Okay, so instead of explaining what osteoporosis is, can you talk about the connection to estrogen?
Sure. So basically, estrogen helps protect your bone density.
Okay.
So when estrogen levels go down, like during menopause, women can be more vulnerable to bone loss and fractures.
Oh, so it's like one hormone shift can have like all these ripple effects.
Exactly. It's like a domino effect.
Wow.
And it goes even beyond bones. Like these estrogen fluctuations are linked to mood swings, trouble sleeping, even changes in your skin.
Wow. So with all this going on, what can we do to support our bodies during these hormone shifts?
That's the big question. And there's no one answer that fits everyone.
Right.
But there are things you can do to manage these changes and just feel better overall.
Yeah.
Like first off, a healthy lifestyle makes a huge difference.
Okay.
So that means a balanced diet, regular exercise, finding ways to manage stress.
Okay. I get that those are good in general, but how do they help specifically with the hormones?
Well, think about it. A balanced diet gives your body the nutrients it needs to make and control those hormones.
Okay.
Exercise gets your blood flowing, which
Okay.
helps with balance.
Right.
And managing stress reduces cortisol,
Okay.
which can mess with other hormones if it's too high.
So it's like building a good foundation.
Exactly.
What else can we do?
Staying informed, talking to your doctor, getting checkups, and keeping an eye on those hormone levels.
Okay.
Catching things early can really make a difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what if like lifestyle changes and monitoring aren't enough? Are there other options?
Yeah, depending on the situation, hormone replacement therapy or HRT might be something to consider.
Okay, I've heard of HRT for menopause. Can it be used for other imbalances too?
It can, but it's a big decision. HRT has both pros and cons, so it's really important to talk openly with your doctor to see if it's right for you.
Right. So it's a personal choice.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. It's good to know there are options, though.
Yeah, and the great thing is that women's health research is always evolving.
That's good.
So there are more personalized and effective treatments coming out all the time.
So it sounds like it comes down to being proactive, advocating for your own health, and working with your doctor.
Exactly. It's a journey,
Yeah.
of self-discovery and empowerment.
I like that.
The more we understand how these hormones work, the better we can handle different stages of life.
Okay, so we've covered a lot, from bone density to HRT.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can learn in one conversation.
Right, and that's what makes these deep dives so interesting.
Exactly.
But we're not quite done with our deep dive into the Phlorena stem device.
That's right.
There's still more to unpack.
Yeah, join us for the final part where we'll sum everything up and leave you with a thought-provoking question.
Okay, welcome back. So, it feels like we've talked about a lot in this deep dive into the Phlorena stem device.
We have.
Everything from like those practical tips to like those insights about hormones. My brain is kind of buzzing.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in.
But before we wrap up, let's recap some of the key things we've learned.
Sounds good. What are you thinking of?
Well, I mean, when it comes to like actually using the device, that whole start low and go slow thing really stood out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to find that sweet spot, where it's working, but it's still comfortable for you.
Right, it's a personal thing.
It is?
And when we're on the topic of like the practical stuff, those like pre-use checks are important too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Making sure everything's connected, the batteries are good, all that.
Yeah, you want to make sure it's safe and effective.
Yeah, exactly. But I think one of the biggest things I'm taking away from this is just understanding how hormones play a role.
Yeah.
Especially estrogen when it comes to pelvic floor health.
Yeah, me too. It's not just about doing your Kegels. It's about understanding the bigger picture of how our bodies work.
Right, and how those hormone changes can really affect things.
Exactly. And that leads us to think about women's health more holistically. Taking care of our bodies with a good diet, regular exercise, managing stress, being proactive about our health.
It's like taking control of your own well-being and advocating for yourself.
Exactly.
I think that's really powerful. Honestly, this deep dive, it hasn't just been about like learning about a device.
Right.
It's been about like gaining knowledge and understanding our bodies better.
I couldn't agree more.
So now it's time to shift gears and, think about our listeners. What final thought or question would you want to leave them with?
Well, we've talked a lot about how these hormones, especially estrogen, go up and down throughout our life.
Yeah.
And how that affects things like pelvic floor strength.
Mm.
So I'd like to ask our listeners this. How could being aware of your own hormone rhythms affect other parts of your life?
Mm.
Think about your energy levels, your mood, even your self-care routines.
Wow, that's a great question. It reminds us that our bodies are always changing.
They are.
And if we pay attention to those changes, we can be more in tune with ourselves.
Exactly. It's about listening to those little signs your body gives you.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave everyone feeling hopeful and empowered.
I like that.
The more we know about our bodies, the better we can live our lives to the fullest.
Well said. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and keep those conversations about women's health going.
And remember, you're not alone in this. We're all on this journey together. Thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive.